Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This lecture we're going to look at Cloud HSM. Now this is one of my favorite services from AWS. The reason is I've always wanted to play around with hardware security modules, but I never worked in security myself, and they're just prohibitively expensive. I mean, going out and purchasing these, then thousands of dollars, and likewise, even just renting them from AWS 12 months ago was going to be a $5,000 activation fee. So I've always wanted to get experience. Thankfully, AWS have now moved to a utility billing model, and they charge just over $1 an hour for these devices, so it becomes much more affordable. So you can do this if you want. Bear in mind, it's not going to be free tier. Don't leave your Cloud HSMs on for very long because it is going to cost you, $1, at least $1 an hour. So just bear that in mind. If you don't want to incur a bill, then you can just follow on and watch me as I go through the console. And just a reminder that this is optional. Basically, in the exam, you're only going to have a few high-level questions as to Cloud HSM. You're not expected to know it inside out. However, if you ever want to work in security in AWS, this is a really popular topic in terms of interviews, so it is definitely worth doing if you've got the time. So just a reminder of the differences between Cloud HSM and KMS. The tenancy for Cloud HSM is single, so it's dedicated hardware to you. It is highly available. We're going to go in and create a cluster. We will need to log into our VPC and create a new subnet in which we can provision this cluster in, because we want a different subnet in a different availability zone that's still a private subnet. The great thing about Cloud HSM is you have full control of the keys. It's supported by AWS. You can have symmetric and asymmetric keys, and it allows you to be FIPS 142 and EAL4 compliant. And just a quick rundown as to what we're going to do. So we've already created our VPC. We need to create an additional private subnet, which we'll go ahead and do. We're then going to create the cluster across those two private subnets. They're going to be in different availability zones. We're then going to go ahead and verify the hardware security module's identity. We're going to create a whole bunch of chain certificates in order to do that. We're then going to initialize the cluster. We're then going to launch a client EC2 instance in which to manage this cluster from, and we're going to install and configure the client. We're then going to activate the cluster. We're going to set up a whole bunch of users, which I will run you through in a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and generate our keys. Once we've got our keys, we're going to export them, and we're going to put them as our public key for EC2, and then we're going to see if we can log in using that key. So it's extremely hands-on. If you've got the time, please join me in the console. Okay, so I'm in the AWS console. I'm going to go ahead and click on VPC. And the first thing we need to do is go ahead and create a new subnet. So we're going to click on subnets. I'm going to go ahead and create this subnet. This subnet I'm going to create in my A-Cloud Guru VPC. In terms of the availability zone, I'm going to go for US East 1C. So I'm going to use the same naming convention. So 10.0.3.0/24. And then I'm going to say US, then East, and then 1C. So it gives me a good name. And then my CIDR block in here, I'm going to do 10.0.3.0/24. And I'm not going to assign an IPv6 CIDR. So I'm going to go ahead and hit yes create. That has now been created, and of course by default it's going to be associated with my default root table. So if I go into my root tables and have a look, it's this one here, and we can see the roots. This here basically allows all my subnets to talk to each other. This one here is my VPC endpoint out to S3. We probably do want to reattach our NAT gateway now because we are going to need it when we go and install some client software. So I'm going to add another root, and I'm going to just add o.o.o.o/o, and I'm going to point this at our NAT gateway, which is this one here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit save. So we now have two private subnets sitting inside our VPC. You can see them here, so it's 2.0 and 3.0. So what I now need to do is go over to Cloud HSM. So if I just go down to security, it's the very bottom one, Cloud HSM. And in here, we're going to go ahead and create a cluster. So where are we going to do this? Well, we're going to do this in our custom VPC. I found this UI a little bit confusing, but remember that US East 1A is our public one, so we only want to deploy it in our private one. So we want this subnet and we want this subnet. So we're going to do the cluster across two availability zones, and they're both private subnets. And then we're going to go ahead and create a new cluster and hit next review. and we're going to go ahead and create the cluster. So creating the cluster can take a little bit of time. Once the cluster is created, we then have to go in and initialize it. So we'll just wait for this to create. Just going to pause the video. Okay, so my cluster has now been created. You can see I have no HSMs in this cluster, and the next thing we need to go ahead and do is initialize the cluster. So to initialize, we just click the initialize button, and it says here, choose an AZ for the creation of the hardware security modules. So I'm going to do a random availability zone, probably going to do 1C just for the hell of it, and then I'm going to go ahead and create. So this is weird. There's no HSMs in US East 1C right now. I've never seen that before. Ideally, I'd like to put it in there because I'd like it to be in a separate one from the instance in which I'm going to manage it, but it looks like I don't get that option, so I'm going to put it into 1B. Hopefully there's one in 1B. Yes, there is. And I actually wondered about this. I wondered, like, how many HSMs do Amazon just have in there waiting, to be initialized? Like, is it in the order of thousands or hundreds? Well, it depends on the availability zone, I guess, but in 1C we have run out of them. So we are initializing this now in 1B. This will take a few minutes, so I'm just going to pause the video. Okay, so that took about 10 minutes for me, but it is now ready. So let's go ahead and hit next. Now we're going to download a whole bunch of different certificates. So we're going to download our cluster CSR, we're going to download our HSM certificate, we're going to download our AWS certificate, and we're going to download our manufacturer's certificate. And then we're also going to download a bunch of root certificates, and these root certificates we're going to use to just authenticate that these certificates are accurate. So I want you to go ahead and download these 4 files now. Once you've done that, please click in here, the Learn More. It'll open up a new tab, and essentially what you want to do is you want to be able to go and get the root certificates from Amazon and from the manufacturer of the HSM, which is a company called Cavium. So just scroll down and click on the root certificate, and then just click in here to download the root certificate. And then once you've done that, go back and go to the manufacturer's root certificate. Just click in here, and you'll be able to get the certificate from the manufacturer, so download that as well. So you should now have 6 different certificates. So I've downloaded those. Please double click on this and unzip the AWS certificate, which I've now done. Go ahead and delete the zip file. The next thing we want to do, I could show you how to do this in the command line for both Windows and for Mac, but it's just going to be a bit of a nightmare. So we're going to go and do this over on our EC2 instance. Again, we probably shouldn't do it in the public subnet, but I'm just going to do it because it's going to, it's going to be an easier example. Now, before we go and do that, what we need to do is go over to EC2. Okay, so I'm in EC2. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to transfer these certificates. We're going to upload them into an S3 bucket. We're then going to transfer them onto our Amazon Linux AMIs, and then we'll be able to run a whole bunch of different commands against these certificates to verify them and to generate our own certificates. In order to do that, we need obviously to have S3 access to our public, web server. So let's go in here and click on Actions, and we're going to go ahead and go over to our instance settings, and we're going to replace our IAM role. Please select the role that you created earlier. That has now given me S3 access. So the next thing I want to do, instead of doing it by the command line, I'll just go into S3 here. I'm going to go ahead and create a bucket. I'm going to call this bucket a Cloud Guru certificate bucket, something like that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and hit create. Hopefully that's available. Yes, it is. I'm going to go in here, and now I'm just going to go and upload my certificates. So here are all my certificates in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit open, and then I'm going to go ahead and upload them to S3. I will now be able to copy these certificates from this device, from our S3 bucket onto EC2. So I want you to SSH into your EC2 public instance. Okay, so I've logged into my instance. I'm just going to elevate my privileges to root, and I'm going to clear the screen, and then we'll just test that our role is working. So AWS S3 LS. There we go, we can see it. So what we want to do is we want to copy the AWS S3 and then copy. And we want to copy the S3 bucket, and my one was called a Cloud Guru certificate bucket. God knows why I give them such long names. And I'm going to copy the entire contents of that bucket to this server. I'm actually just check what directory I'm in. You can do that just by typing in pwd, present working directory. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that over to my home, and then ec2-user. Then I'm going to do that recursively. So I'm going to grab it all and hit enter. I'm not having any luck today. It's recursive. It's getting late here. So there we go. It has copied our certificates across. If we type in ls, we'll be able to see our certificates. So I'm actually going to end the lecture here because I want to go through from a theoretical point of view what we're about to do. You can read this all in the AWS documentation, but it's not animated and it's very confusing. It literally took me like an hour and a half to figure out what it is that we're actually doing. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.